Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Smart Trucking Live. I see you guys are signing up and joining in already here. Good evening, Andrew. Good evening, Devin. Great Honesty, hello to you. Dusty Roads. Howdy from Phoenix. Boy, I bet you it's a lot warmer in Phoenix than it is here. Riley, James, good evening. How are you guys doing? Highway Honey, Daniel Meredith, Bobby Spruill, Beto Lopez, James, I should say, Mylan, Grafton, William, 66 AZA, or Z, I guess, ANNOR. Hello from Pennsylvania. Hello, sir. How are you? Good to have you guys all joining us tonight. We're going to talk about California's AB5 ruling tonight. That's, I know it's on hold right now. There are a couple of different angles here to this AB5, and I wanted to discuss this and look at the different sides of AB5 because there's a couple different sides to it. So we should be aware, to be fair, we should be aware of both sides of the argument. So let's get started in on that in a second. Patricia, Dawn, Chef Matt, welcome you guys. Big Earl, how are you doing tonight?
Somebody from Sudbury.
Who's from Sudbury? Oh, there he is. OTR from Sudbury, Ontario. Well, you know what the weather's like up here. Thank you for joining us. So, AB5, California's AB5. What that basically is they're trying to make owner-operators out as employees. Now, why is that? Well, you've heard me say before that it always comes down to money, and that's the case with this AB5 regulation. California figures that it's losing about $6 billion annually in lost tax revenue from owner-operators because they file incorrectly or they don't file at all, or they're, they just forget. So it's all about money for California. But not only is it all about money, California is a big state for making sure that their labor force is treated fairly. And California looks at the average owner-operator operating in their state these days and saying, you know what? Those guys are getting ripped off. They're not getting paid for all their time. And California stands against things like that. They want fair labor laws for all the people working in that state. And so for those two reasons, that's why California has enacted AB5. Now, who's against the AB5? Well, the carriers, particularly the ATA carriers. And why is that? Let's go into that. They're making a big noise, the carriers and the ATA, and they're saying, and they're pumping up the owner-operators to say, you're going to lose your independence and all of that. That's not why the ATA and all these carriers don't want AB5. The reason they don't want AB5 is because carriers make their best money from owner-operators and lease operators. So, bar no other reason, they don't want the income hit. They make their best money from those guys. They make less money when they have to buy a company truck. They have to pay the driver by the hour. They have to pay the driver for all his work time. Whereas owner-operators, they can sit them for hours and hours on end. It's just part of the way owner-operators are treated, and the carriers know this. Carriers get away with it every day, and California's looked at that and said, hey, that's not right. But boy, there's a big screaming from the big carriers. Now, AB5 is on hold right now because a judge has put a temporary injunction against it. But, California, $6 billion, California is not going to give that up easily. And everybody in the state was against CARB, for instance, because they feared the impact of CARB on trucks. Well, California didn't care. They did it anyway. And I expect this AB5 is going to go the same way. At the end of the day, California's going to want the money, and they'll let the chips fall where they may. So the Western Trucking Association and the ATA and all these guys may just have to suck it up, but we'll see. Really? What do you think? What do you think of this AB5, Trevor? How is that going to affect you? I'd be interested to know. Wasn't Dave a former Concord transport driver? No, sir. No, Mike.
I already said no.
Never worked for Concord. But where was I on this?
Somebody else from CA?
Yeah. Oh, Coral from California. Thank you for joining us. So how do you guys see this playing out? Let's call a spade here, and let's just cut to the chase. Over the years, the carriers have changed the definition of what is an owner-operator. It used to be an owner-operator had his own equipment, his own authority, and he just ran his own freight. That was an owner-operator. Now, gradually, the years changed, and carriers wanted to attract guys to pull for them. So originally, they attracted real owner-operators to run on their authority, their own authority, but pull the carrier's freight, help them pull the freight. Then it got to the point where they would take owner-operators and put them under the carrier's operating authority. And they really just became, an owner-operator working at a carrier. Then, because times financially got tough, fewer and fewer owner-operators decided that it was worth it to run, and gradually started dropping out of the industry. And the carriers flipped because they didn't want that. So they invented these lease operator programs, told these guys that these guys were going to be owner-operators, even though the carrier held all the financing, all the chips, the running authority, the plates. Carriers owned everything. But they convinced these guys to get them to hire on that they would be independent contractors. But there was nothing independent about them. They don't buy their own fuel. They don't pay for their own truck. They can't control where their maintenance is performed. They can't even drive the trucks home, half of them, when they're done their work for the week. They're completely controlled by the carrier. But it was to the advantage of the carrier to have these lease operators tell them they were owner-operators, and the carrier is making money hand over fist on these lease operators, and they sure don't want to give that up, because that's just a huge hit. They'll have to buy their own company trucks, pay their company drivers accordingly, and it's going to be a huge expense. So carriers do not want this AB5 regulation. Here's something, Trevor, because California likes big corporation and not independents. Yeah, that's right. California has been changing independent contractor laws for everybody for years, and that's right. So today, an owner-operator, what used to be called an owner-operator, is now an independent, a true independent, because he has his own operating authority, he has his own trailer, he has his own truck, owns the plates, he does everything. And that guy is a true independent. They used to call him an owner-operator years ago. But there's something else too now. An independent carrier, or an independent guy, with his own authority and plates, can't really grow his outfit into a 2 or 3 truck operation unless everybody signing on has their own operating authority. So the whole thing's just become a hazy mess. And it'll be curious to see how it all works out. Mike Holden says that's certainly true. Very, very few ever pay off their own trucks. And that's true. Most of these guys that the carriers tell them they're independent contractors, most of those guys haven't had a truck yet for 10 years. So they don't even know the full operating scope of the business yet. And most of them, the large majority of them, won't be able to replace that truck when it comes time to replace it because they won't have the money in the bank. California, under their CARB rules, is going to mandate that the equipment be updated, but most of these guys that think they're owner-operators won't be able to do that. So, the carriers will try to finance them again or whatever just to keep them making money. And as soon as they go broke, the carrier will just repo the truck. So that's not an owner-operator at all. But there are so many of these guys now in this lease operator program thinking they're owner-operators that it's changed the whole scenario. And to those guys, I would say, look, by the time the carrier that's leasing you the truck takes your lease payment, your fuel, your maintenance, and everything else they take, Are you really, truly, at the end of the day, making any more money than a company driver, a good company driver? Some of these Walmart company guys are dragging down 80 grand a year plus. Can you honestly say that after all your expenses that the carrier takes, that you're left with 80 grand a year? I know you're not. So with this AB5, you might want to rethink your whole financial scenario here. Is it going to be worth it to continue like this and continue to be a slave to the carrier? Or are you smart at this point to just become a company driver? Or, if you want to carry on, if you're convinced this is the right way to go for you, are you prepared to move out of the state? And that's a big deal. That's a huge deal. Yeah, they never plan correctly. And that's right, James. It's because most of them now haven't been in business very long. They don't know that in 3 years' time they're going to have to lay out 6 grand for tires, for instance. How many of them have 6 grand in the bank in their maintenance fund? Well, virtually none of them. So they'll go to the carrier, and the carrier will front them the tires and charge them 8 grand to make money off it. And the carriers are just making money on this deal all day long, but not really the guys that think they own the trucks. It's a wicked scenario with a downhill spiral. So it might be time to really reevaluate your business picture here. It's kind of a no-win deal anymore. There are some true still owner operators and independents operating, but there are very few of them anymore. So you might want to look at this scenario because AB5 will help clean up this mess. Maybe California's going the right way, and it's going to affect everybody differently. But maybe some of these guys that look at their equipment now and think, well, in 2025, my equipment's going to be outdated. Am I going to have enough in the bank to replace that truck, refinance a new truck? And the answer in 95% of the cases will be no. And there you are. So everybody's got to kind of look ahead to the future and see where they are. A lot of these lease operators that, if they have a couple of months where the carrier doesn't hit them for one deduction or another, think, oh man, I'm making big money, and they run out and buy themselves a new pickup truck or something like that. Really, that money should be going into your maintenance account or your truck account or something. Shouldn't be, buying yourself a new pickup truck, but that's what 95% of them do, and then 95% of them are out of business before they hit year 7, just because the maintenance cost, plus the lease cost, plus the operating cost, all adds up to more money they can possibly make in a month, because the ELDs restrict you now. You can only run a hard 70 hours, whether you're sitting at the dock for free or whatever. 70 hours, that's it, no cheating. And you can't make up for the time or the money that you've lost. It's a slimy slope because the mega carriers are slime little leeches. That's from Chef Matt. Yeah, there are some good carriers out there, but again, they're few and far between. There are good carriers that honestly want their guys to succeed, because those carriers want those guys to stay with them for long periods of time. Big carriers like Swift and Prime don't have that mentality. They just count on a constant driver turnover. That's part of their business model, is to anticipate this turnover and just keep schooling more guys. As guys go out the door, more guys come in the door. That's how they cycle. But there are a few carriers out there that really want to keep their good people. But most of the big ones don't think that way. Need insurance in a truck, which I have. My uncle gave me his truck. Oh, that's pretty nice, Whipbone. And yeah, I still want to attend school, so the insurance is cheaper. There's another area where the carriers are dinging these owner operators for the cost of the insurance, and you could never truly get the actual figure out of a carrier what insurance for one truck was costing, but they know they bump the cost of the insurance up to these lease operators. They bump the cost of everything up to the lease operators, right? From oil changes to tires to tarps, you name it. They all add a percentage.
Are there any owner operators on here today?
Yes, are there any owner operators following us this evening? I'd be curious to get their take on this. So that's where I stand on this AB5. You can see both sides of it. Now, it's been delayed in the courts, but that's only a temporary thing. So we'll find out. We'll find out. It may take them 6 months to settle it or implement it one way or the other. Maybe the carriers have more political pull than I think they do in California. But look at this settlement in California with the Walmart drivers here the last month. The carrier Walmart has to pay out 42.5 million in money they should have paid their company drivers. And California looks at that case and goes, how many of these carriers are beating their drivers? And we've got to put an end to this. And that's what they're doing. And that's why you see these huge lawsuits in California. California is sick of losing tax revenue, and they're sick of seeing drivers mistreated. And there's an awful lot of that. Mason, my dad is an owner operator. What's your dad's take on this, Mason? I'd be curious to know. I don't know if he operates in California or not. A lot of guys, and there's something else you can do too, and I've had to do it myself. A lot of guys can just stop operating in California, and all sorts of guys have stopped operating in California. Now, I quit operating out there because my truck was no longer CARB compliant, and I just didn't feel it was worth the money to buy a new truck, especially when the emissions stuff weren't making them run properly. I wasn't willing to take that chance. But, I gave up California. It was a business decision. And this is going to be a business decision too for a lot of these guys that aren't so hooked up to the carrier. They can't do what they want anyway. But for those guys that have an option, have a choice, that's going to be a business decision. Are you going to be able to move to another state and still generate enough revenue to make it worth your while?
Few owner operators here tonight.
Terry, I hear a lot of guys are moving to Nevada. Yes, I have heard that too. A lot of guys moving to Nevada and Arizona. So, you know what? Considering the tax structure in California, I think I'd be moving there anyway. I'm an owner operator doing heavy haul in Michigan. Mike, that's quite a deal out there, Mike. I've seen those heavy haul guys plenty of times. That's unbelievable weight, unbelievable trailers. I don't know how you guys afford the tires on those things. There's so many tires. But what do you think of that, Mike? I'd be curious to know your take on AB5 in California.
Mason, Keeler, California was the decision my father had to make, and he declined.
Yeah, and Mason, all sorts of guys are doing that. And maybe that's where the smart money's going. And you see these big carriers like Swift pulling their operations out of California, and Landstar, same thing. They're just figuring the legal battle is not going to be worth the hassle, and they feel they'll lose it anyway. And that's all sorts of these big carriers now are pulling out of California. And if they're going to run their California freight, they're doing it with company guys that are already classed as company employees. They're not going to use their lease operators out there anymore. So that's the big carriers thinking on how this is going to go. I run an International Eagle, 1996, religiously. Maintain, don't idle, and the truck is paid off. Mike, see there, you're in a good position. You're in a great position because you can do exactly whatever is going to be best for your business. That's the position all owner-operators try to get into. Very few of them make it anymore, but good for you, Mike. AB5 has been put on hold, Trucker Hershey. Yes, but only till the end of the month, while the judge examines what he thinks of this argument that the Western Trucking Association has put forth. And basically what the argument is that, once again, the argument is that all trucking is controlled federally, and the states can't override it with any rules. And that's what California's trying to do. But, that's a tough call. I don't know how that'll go in court. California is perfectly allowed to mandate its workers when within the state. Are trucking companies going to be enemy territory? Oh, I don't think they'll be enemy territory, but a lot of them may have to buck and whine and buy these lease operators back out again and keep them as employees. That'll be interesting to see. So there's a lease operator that's already put in 70, 80 grand into the truck, and the carrier will buy it back for 30 or 40. They'll buy it back for market value, and once again the lease operator will take the hit. And there's another way the lease operators just get sunk hollow, because the carrier will buy a fleet of these trucks to lease for maybe 100 grand a truck. They'll charge 160, 180 for the truck to the lease operator, and by the time the guy gets it all paid off, if he ever truly gets it paid off, and most of them don't, the guy will have paid 180, 200 grand for a $100,000 truck that's now, if he ever gets it paid off, it's now worth virtually nothing, maybe 10 grand, all that money. So all these guys have really done is buy themselves a job. And you've got to look at the math, and you've got to decide, with something like this going on in California, and now other states like Jersey and that are starting to look at this as well. You've got to wonder if it's really going to be worth it. And it's going to be a crapshoot, because these states are all losing tax revenue, and none of them want to lose a dime. So you can really see the push coming for this. And it's always, crap always rolls downhill, just the way it is. So who's going to be at the receiving end of the crap at the end of the day? The poor guy driving the truck. That's just life. That's how it goes. Washington is looking at it as well, Trevor. Yeah. Oh, also, I believe at the last count there were 9 different states looking at implementing this AB5 type of thing. We've already had it up here in Ontario, so we're well used to the fact that you've got to be very careful how you classify yourself. But it's just kind of a new thing down there.
What's your opinion on AB5? What do you think it should happen?
What's my opinion on AB5? I think, considering that the majority of these guys that will be affected by this are lease operators, and the majority of these guys will be being abused by their carriers, because that's what they do. I think AB5 is probably a good thing if they implement it, because I don't like to see people getting soaked, and that's what these lease operator programs are. So if California's AB5 helps prevent that, I'm all for it. It's just basically these guys are buying themselves a job, and they come home with nothing at the end of the day. It may take a few years to come home with nothing, but they're coming home with nothing. And I don't think that's the American dream, to work your butt off all your life and come home with absolutely nothing at the end of it. At least with a company guy, you could hopefully get in with a good company that has a pension plan or benefits, that type of thing. Pays you by the hour when you're sitting for the docks, and you work for a good carrier that's paying their guys 80 grand a year, and you're not, working your butt off to pay a lease operator truck and coming home with nothing. And some of these guys are so tied up in the pride of ownership, or they think it's ownership. They're so tied up in being able to stick out their chest and say, oh, I own my own truck. Well, horse hooey, you do. The carrier owns it. Look at the ownership. It's in the carrier's name, not yours. So you've got to get away from that mental attitude and do the math, because this is business, and everything is math. It's not, how important you feel at the truck stop or when you go home bragging to your neighbors. You can only go 55 miles an hour in California. Yep, that's true too. So you're, and with the ELDs, you're severely governed on how fast you can run, how much you can make, how long you can drive. And it's not like the old days when we bought trucks, and if, we were having a slow month, we would just work, 100, 120 hours a week to try to make up money, and we would do that. But you can't do that with these ELDs. Once you're behind, you're going to stay behind. There's no working extra overtime to catch up, and that's a problem with the ELDs, and that's a problem with these programs here. You can't bail yourself out. Once you start to get in trouble, there's no coming back. Yeah, it's just a downhill spiral. And you think, well, the carrier will bail me out. No, buddy. He's just adding it on to your bill. And at some point they say, well, you owe us 50 grand. Can you pay it or not? You can't pay it? Well, we're going to have to take back the truck. Sorry. And then they just put the next lease operator on it. Now, I've seen all sorts of these big carriers use the same truck for 3 or 4 different lease operators, one after the other. So do they get their money back on those lease trucks? Heck yes. Some of them, like Prime, make more money leasing equipment than they do hauling freight, for God's sakes. It's just a dirty racket.
How do drivers go about making a united front in the industry? We've had a few people ask this question.
That's a really good question, and I frankly think that the industry is so diversified anymore that I don't think we can truly unite as a group. I do think, though, that, and I'm not for truck strikes or anything like that those rolling convoy strikes never work. They just tick off the public. And these guys that go to Washington, nothing ever comes out of that. And you know what? We never got anything out of the truck strikes in the 70s. We thought we'd done a big deal. Nothing ever really came of it. So I think the best thing to do these days is everybody just kind of plan a vacation, plan to take the same week off in July or something, and everybody just go fishing, and just the number of trucks that come off the road after something like that will impact them enough that they'll notice. You won't have to say, no, I'm going on strike because I don't like the conditions. Just everybody say, oh, no, my mother was sick, or I went fishing, or my truck was broke, or come up with every excuse you want, whatever you want to do. But just take that same week off, and if you're short 20,000, 30,000 trucks that week, they'll notice. It'll sting. And if nothing much comes of it, no one's paying attention, just do it again in another few weeks. And there's nothing militant about it. There won't be any violence involved in it. The Teamsters won't have to stick their neck in there and try to claim responsibility. It's just everyone going, no, I think I've had enough abuse for a while. I'm going to go fishing with my kids this week. I think that'd be the best way to go.
I think AB5 is a money grab to fund government programs and pensions. Brother J. Powell.
Sure it is. You don't know what California will do with that $6 billion, but one thing you can bet on, they'll do whatever they want. There'll be no stopping them. And then no other state's any different. But yeah, if they get that $6 billion, they'll use it for whatever they want. California's basically a broke state anyway, so they're looking for anything to infuse cash into their system. They've overspent themselves, and many states are like that. Michigan's another one. So they're doing anything to put money in the bank these days. And who's going to be able to fight it? Not the truck drivers. Daniel, I really want to leave Swift, but I want to finish my first year up and pay off my loan, and at least have 1 year experience. That's probably the best way to handle that, Daniel. Stick it out, fulfill your contract, pay them off, and then, write it off as the cost of getting a year's experience, your first year's experience. I think that's what I'd do anyway.
So what do you suggest that the people in California do that are affected?
Everybody in California has got to step back and reevaluate their position. And I would sit down with a real accountant, not sit down at your kitchen table and try to figure it out yourself and forecast your future. But sit down, run the numbers with the accountant, do a projection for the next few years as to how much money you're going to have paid in the truck and all of these other things. And bear in mind, too, if you're a lease operator, at any moment, the carrier can get rid of you they can even make up a reason. just to get the truck away from you and hire somebody else to put in it. They look at your financial situation and go, we're never getting our money out of this guy anymore. So keep that in mind too. Be honest about what you think your realistic future is. Do you really think you're going to be able to afford to update that truck in a few years when California said you've got to update it and things like that? Tires are $600 a piece and you're going to need 8 of them. Are you really going to be able to afford it?
Willie 9T says businesses are moving out of California in masses, and Trevor Michaud says 700,000 people left California just last year.
Yes, that's true. There is a mass exodus out of California for all sorts of reasons, but it's it's probably a smart business move. California's they're going their own way, for better or for worse, and that's just how they've decided to handle their financial situation. They're looking to score money wherever they can.
David Cherry says it's because of the cost of living in California is absolutely crazy.
And the cost of living is crazy there anyway. I don't know how many of you guys can still afford to live there. Certainly you're not along the coast. You can't afford to live there. So you can live in the valley and pay $800 a month on air conditioning bills and stuff like that, but it's not a very affordable state to live in anymore. The price of everything in California is very high. It used to be that everybody wanted to live in California because it was it was so beautiful, but now they've just jacked the price out of everything, and most truck drivers can't afford to live in the state of California anymore.
Which is sad.
Which is sad, but that's the way it's going.
Okay, let's do a few minutes of some rapid fire questions.
Okay, give me some questions here. Massachusetts is extremely expensive. I'm considering moving out because taxes here are way too. Yeah, there are states like Massachusetts and Connecticut on the eastern seaboard, New York State, if you're down around the water, where the taxes are just going through the roof. And it's because the rich people want to live there, and it drives the tax base up, and it's pushing the average guy out. And I don't think that's right, but that's what's happening everywhere. It's happening up even in the woods here where I live. So that's just government making money.
Okay, for a few minutes we'll do some rapid fire questions. If you folks want to throw out a few questions for Dave, and we'll take some random questions. We don't want the California Liberals, just keep them.
Easier said than done. John, I'm thinking about going into OTR trucking. Which state is good for me to move to and get the best out of trucking? Any of the Midwest states are good, like Nebraska, Colorado, Nevada, anything away from the coastlines.
Trucker Hershey agrees with you. He says Midwest.
Yeah. Midwest is always better.
I always hear people say avoid the mega carriers. How else is a person supposed to get into trucking if they don't go with the mega carriers to get their CDL? I want to be trained well to do this.
Well, and that depends on where you live. Now, some guys are fortunate enough to live in an area where there are small carriers that will train you that are good. But sometimes you just have no choice as to have to go to a mega carrier, depending on where you live, because that's all there is. And you just got to kind of bite the bullet and put up with it for a year. And it's not a bad way to get your training, because in your first year you'll bash stuff up and stuff. It's just the way it is. So you might as well bash up one of Swift's trailers as compared to somebody else's that's really going to mind. Guys like Swift are used to that, So you won't make much money, but you're not there for the money. You're there for the experience. If you're going to do that, hopefully you do it before you become a family guy, so your bills aren't through the roof, because you'll have a hard time meeting your bills. But that way you've got the time and no obligation. You go run team with one of these guys while they teach you and make diddly squat in the meantime, but you can survive a year of it anyway. Minnesota. Yeah, Minnesota's a good state to move to.
Yes, learn on someone else's dime.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, learn on someone else's dime.
And there are some mega carriers that are more reputable than others too.
Certainly there are. I've never heard bad things about Maverick, for instance. It's a mega carrier, flatbed operation, but that's a well-run operation. So if you're in that area, I'd certainly consider Maverick. They're not all liars and thieves, just most of them. Mason Conway is a billionaire mega but pays low. Yes, they are. What do they call them now, though? They don't call them Conway anymore. Something logistic, XPO Logistics now. But yeah, they're huge.
What do you think about import driving companies' jobs like roles? I'm not sure of that question. Conway is CFI. Is that right?
Well,
Is that what you were
they may
looking at?
own CFI, but
Oh.
they're operating under XPO Logistics.
Yeah, the XPO selling out.
If you mean import driving companies, Daniel, are you talking about carriers that bring in drivers from overseas? Because that's a lot of companies do that now, but that's just a Band-Aid solution. Once the immigrants figure out that their pay doesn't keep up with the cost of living, they'll be moving on too. They'll figure out sooner or later that they can't live off that kind of money. TMC is a good company, says Michael Swan, I hear. Yes, I've heard that too about TMC. Nice equipment too. Lazy people don't do flatbed. That's why they get the good students. Eric, interesting point of view. I would imagine you're right about that too.
I just bought a Peterbilt 379 2004 with a Cat NZ. Hope everything goes well.
You know what? That's exactly what I have. And it's been a great truck for me. I put over 1.1 million miles on it, and it's been a really good truck. So I'd say you've done well. They're a good truck. Well, I think we've about covered it for this evening. You guys think about what I've said. If you're in California, if you're a lease operator or an owner operator in California, sit back, take a few days, find a good accountant, take your paperwork there and run through all the numbers with him and get a projection for the next few years as to what he thinks your likelihood of making decent money is going to be. And I'm betting the accountants will just tell you straight out it's not worth your while to do it. You're better off as a company driver. That's my guess, and I feel for you guys because I know what it was like to want to have my own truck. But at the end of the day, you don't want to lose your shirt and go through bankruptcy, and that's what you've got to look at these days. So be careful, make the right decision, take the time to make the right decision. Take care. Thank you all for joining us. I appreciate the feedback. Always good to talk with you guys. Keep the rubber side down, and we'll see you on the back haul. Take care now.